Thank you, everybody, for coming. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know I stand between you and your activities tonight, and I just hope it's true. They tell me the best goes last, so we'll see about that. So my name is Daniel Manning. I'm with North Carolina Emergency Management, and I'm here to tell you what we've been working on for the last 2 years and what we're currently focused on. But I do want to start by Robert's comment. I think Robert said the favorite thing of my whole conference. How many of you know your county or your local EM person? Oh, that's a great hands. Just curiosity, how many have ever used North Carolina Emergency Management's Fiman system on a phone? You tried. Don't say anything, okay. It's not very mobile friendly. We are well aware of that. We're also looking at Google Analytics, and we're well aware that everybody is trying to hit it on their mobile phone. So we're not clueless. We currently have a contractor working to make the Fiman system mobile friendly. We are updating our technology stack, and we're meeting OWASP, or cybersecurity best practices. Very few of you in the room have probably heard of Fiman-T. That's because I'm introducing it and retiring it all in the same speech. So if you know Fiman, and you can go to a river gauge, basically what Fiman does is it lets you go to river gauge, and it lets you see where that river gauge is and if it's rising or falling. I also like to say you can play Mother Nature, and that if it has a flood inundation library or scenario, you can go and make the water come up and down. Well, so what Fiman does is it lets you look at your structures, your buildings, and it lets you see what will be impacted by certain events. In Fiman-T, it does the exact same thing, but for roads. And so rather than DOT's, some of this data is pretty new and it's engineered, it's modeled, so we're kind of still QCing it and making sure it looks good before we release it to the world. But basically, with the new Fiman system, we are merging Fiman and Fiman-T, so you can both look at the building inundation and the road inundation at the same time. And I commonly get asked, hey, Dan, show me what happened at this gauge during Florence. And I say, I will, but it's completely irrelevant because that exact same storm is never going to happen again. But nonetheless, I have to appease them. So basically, in the new Fiman system, you'll be able to click on if there is a historic event, you'll be able to click on the historic event, and it'll show you what that inundation looked like at that gauge, plus or minus a half foot. And that tool will actually be authenticated, so we'll have to work with you, RGS, and local government partners to get access. Does anybody know if their county, from a floodplain mapping perspective, is currently in prelim status? AK, we're getting ready to update your floodplain. Nobody knows that. That's probably a communication problem on our part. But anyway, we, North Carolina Emergency Management, if you get a call from your floodplain administrator and they say, hey, we have prelim now, what does that mean or what does it look like? We now have a website where it's a slider where you can go back and forth and you can see what your floodplains will look like when they get through the due process. Additionally, if you have politics or interests or want to make comments, you can also make your comments a markup. They're like, hey, this doesn't look right. This stream floods all the time. Why is it not there? Why is it not being studied? So forth and so on. So again, if your floodplain administrator is asking you what your floodplains are going to look like, contact us and we can give you a great viewer to do that and provide feedback. So historically, we EM have, during hurricanes, collected what we refer to as damage assessments or preliminary damage assessments. So let's just say that Tropical Storm Fred comes in and it does a lot of damage to Buncombe and Haywood or Transylvania County. We EM want to get federal dollars or a federally declared disaster if there is enough damage as quickly as possible so that we can get more money to you, the locals. And so historically, there's been a little bit of a hodgepodge. Robert, you might remember this. We used to have you go enter your data into WebESC and try to have you tell us the exact dollar estimate. We're kind of moving on from that now. We have a search and rescue team, and they have a whole series of Survey 123 applications. And if a search and rescue team gets there first, as they did during Tropical Storm Fred, they're looking for missing people, but they're also taking pictures of, missing buildings that there's only a structure there. And so we are shortly here between now and hurricane season, and probably a little after hurricane season. We're going to be doing kind of a road show. Josh is something I'd love to get you all to help me with. But basically, we are going to go to the different 15 areas that we have, which is about 5 counties each. And we're going to be training people how to use the damage assessment app. And our focus here is to keep it really easy, but basically if your county or your municipality is impacted by a flooding event or tornado or another natural disaster, we want your help to go collect this. And one big caveat that we saw during Tropical Storm Fred, we were there and we want to do a preliminary damage assessment, and we want to identify if there's enough damaged or destroyed structures to potentially meet a FEMA or a federal threshold. And then once we get the federal threshold or the federally declared disaster for your county, we are almost done. And so what that does is we get FEMA to come do a joint assessment, and then FEMA agrees, yes, you have enough damage. We will call this disaster a federally declared disaster for area or county X. Note to self, after that, we are going to back off a lot. We don't need to tell our commissioners, this is the exact damage, this is every single house, this is every single fence that got broken. And so just don't be mad at us if we come in, once we get that federal disaster, we are kind of moving on to the recovery stage, assuming that the floodwaters are down. How many people have a building footprint data set for their local government? Keep your hand up if you made it yourself. I'm not sure either. So back in the 2010 timeframe, we, North Carolina Emergency Management, hired a contractor, and we created a statewide building footprint data set. It was very expensive and it was very important. So when a hurricane is coming towards North Carolina, what we do is we do a damage estimate routine or model. And so what we'll do is we'll take the data that NOAA or the National Weather Service is giving to us, and we'll say, this is what we're guesstimating the impact or the damage is going to be. And so we'll say something, say, hey, FEMA, we think this is between a $25 million and $100 million event. And they'll be like, yeah, we're thinking this is like 150 to 200. Regardless, we agree that you're over the threshold. And our main purpose is to get the pre-landfall declaration so that we can stage resources and essentially start using the federal dollars earlier. Because let me tell you, when the feds are paying 75%, they approve things a lot more than if we're paying 100%. But nonetheless, I'm a little behind, but what we're doing moving forward, at least 2020 to 2023, is we're trying to update that building footprint. We recognize it's very, very out of date. And so over here on the right, if you are any one of these blue counties, inclusive of Duplin and Columbus, who we're currently working on, by the end of April, I'm going to have a new building footprint data set for you. And so we're basically going to get timestamp that. That's the 2020 coastal, in this case, 27 counties building footprint. And so this summer, come May, I'm going to have some more interns and folks working on the 2021. So if you're in that 2021 region right here, hopefully sometime in August, I'll be able to get a new building footprint data set for you. And I know this is probably more statistics than you want, but we have that existing, what we call the risk building footprint, aka the circa 2010 building footprint. That data set that data set for the 2020 data, our 2020 region, is about 860,000 records. We borrowed data from counties, we borrowed data from Microsoft, we borrowed data from agriculture, we did some LiDAR extraction data, and we have a composite building footprint data set that has another $155,000 for this first region. And what we found is we removed, our interns deleted about a little over 90,000 buildings. But regardless, this 2020 area here, we have just under 1 million building footprints, or about 927,000 building footprints. And so my goal is I'm going to put that on a SharePoint website. I'm going to be contacting your county GS coordinators, and I'm going to send it to you and ask you to please help us QC it. So one thing that's not done, we've just captured the geometry, right? But we have a conflation tool. And what the conflation tool does is it goes out to your statewide parcel data, thank you very much. It pulls out the PIN number. It pulls out the improved building value. It also pulls out the year built sometimes and the storage sometimes. And that's difficult, right? If there's two buildings on one piece of land, then it ain't right if it tells me these three buildings are two stories or these three buildings are built in 1978 or whatever. But nonetheless, we're working on the conflation tool. What it does is it pulls out attributes from the parcel data. Additionally, FEMA puts out a data set called HAZUS, and they put a lot of stuff there, but it's by census block. And so we're also pulling out some of the HAZUS data that relates to our damage estimate modeling that I was talking about. Additionally, here in the top right-hand corner, I have a three-dimensional house We also, for buildings that are not in a floodplain, we capture something called the HAG and lag. And so with the LiDAR data, we can tell you the lowest adjacent grade is this elevation and the highest adjacent grade is that elevation. And I'll talk about why the HAG and lag is relevant. But basically, we're guesstimating something called the first floor elevation for data that's, for the building footprints that are not in the 100-year floodplain. Okay, I just said 100-year floodplain. Jeff, you need to scream every time I say 100-year floodplain, okay? So here's a question. This blue area right here has a 1% annual chance of flooding every year. And there's a building right here. Raise your hand if you think that building's gonna flood and have significant damage if we have a 1 or 100-year event. Ooh, smart crowd. Who thinks you need a lot more information? Okay, I'll play that game. So there's two pieces of information in the floodplain world that are really, really important. And the first one is first floor elevation. Anyone not been to the Outer Banks? Anyone not seen a house on stilts? Building a house on pylons is really expensive compared to building on the ground. And there's a really good reason that they build this house at 13 feet, or the first floor elevation is 13 feet above the ground, the surface of the earth. And the reason why that house is at 13 feet is because the base flood elevation, BFE, is 12.2 feet. So back to my scenario, is this house on the bottom left can have significant flooding impact damage in a 1% annual chance storm? No, it's not. Okay, so let's come up here to the commercial building. So the first floor elevation is 5.2 feet. The base flood elevation, again, how high the water would get in a 100-year flooding event, is 12 feet. And I love this place because they're so nice to us. They went and painted right to base flood elevation. That's just a joke, they probably didn't. But the most important thing here, I'm gonna give you a little riddle to remember this, all right? The FFE and the BFE can be best friends forever as long as the first floor elevation remains higher, okay? So why do I tell you all that silliness and all that joke? I'm begging you, if you're with a local municipality that has a floodplain administrator or a floodplain program, we, emergency management, we would love you if you gave us your elevation certificates. And you're kind of asking, like, what the hell's an elevation certificate, Dan? Well, so when you build on the Outer Banks or in a floodplain, if your floodplain administrator is doing what they're supposed to do, which we all know they are, you have to get an elevation certificate. And what that elevation certificate tells us is the first floor elevation is 17 feet. And keep in mind, and people will tell you, but I don't have all those digitized. I don't have all those scans. Some of them are paper in the cabinet. If it's older than 2010, I don't care. Because we, in 2010, we went out and captured the vast majority of first floor elevations for a building that were in a floodplain. But nonetheless, if you can get me the elevation certificates, I will painstakingly have one of my coworkers pull out the first floor elevation and the foundation type and give you back a point data set, or give you back, better yet, your building footprints with your first floor elevation so you can tell if it's gonna flood in that first picture. But in addition, on the elevation certificates, they tell us what a foundation type is. And foundation types is really important to us nerds that are in the floodplain mapping world, because if you're a slab, right, on grade, you're gonna flood a lot sooner than a house that has a built-up crawl space, right? Specifically 3 feet higher or whatever. And if you're on pylons or you have a full basement, hopefully, if you're in a floodplain that's not finished, we can pull out some of that data and guesstimate first floor elevations. Okay, so moment of truth, and I'm gonna close my eyes and not look. How many of y'all help maintain your county's web-based mapping application? I am looking, don't worry. Okay. How many of you have floodplains on that? All right, I'm not looking anymore. How many have 100-year floodplain on that map? All right, put your hands down because I'm gonna turn around. Sam, I'm gonna pick on you. Last year, Jeff's house in 100-year floodplain flooded. When will it flood again?
If there's another 1% chance.
Oh my God, I did not pay him. Yes. I don't know how many of y'all played Axis and Allies or D&D, right? But you roll that 20-sided die, and you hit a 20, you rip his head off, and you hit the one, you break your sword. We do not like rolling ones in 100-year floodplains. But essentially every year, And I used to kid, so in 16, right, we had Hurricane Matthew. And then in 18, we had Florence. And I would tell people, don't worry, we won't have another 500-year event until 2022, right? But basically, every year we roll the 1% dice. And if you roll a 1, you flood. And so from a floodplain mapping perspective, we have something called reoccurrence intervals. And this is kind of an important concept to learn because we'll be talking about quite a bit. But so basically, easy math, if it's a 10-year flooding event, every year, right, on a 10-sided dice, you roll a 1, you flood, right? 10% chance. And pretty much nobody lives there, right? Because, your house would literally flood a lot. And then we have 25-year, 50-year. The big kicker with the 100-year, right, is that's what your insurance is tied to. So if you want to build a house and you're on the Outer Banks and you want to get a mortgage, well, if you get a mortgage, you got to get insurance, right? And so the 100-year floodplain is where all the insurance is tied to. But I'm not going to be looking at your websites, don't worry. But if you look at the North Carolina FRIS website, which is also not mobile friendly, we're going to update that. We call it a 1% annual chance. And FEMA would really like you guys to call it a 1% annual chance because we recognize the mindset of the public, it's 100-year, it just flooded in 18, I'm going to go ahead and buy this house, it's good for another 80 years. That's not how probability works, as Sam has educated us. Okay, I was just poking around, I'm pretty new at EM, I was just poking around, and a lot of times academics will call me and say, hey, we want to know what flooded during Florence. And I say, well, go talk to your local county emergency manager, drive to whatever neighborhood you're talking to, and he'll tell you what flooded during that event, right? We can't really do that. But we do have rasters that say this is what should flood in a 10-year, 25, 50, 100-year, and sometimes the 500-year event. We do not map beyond the 500-year event, ever. And so if we have a 500-plus year event, right, don't call me afterwards and say, hey, what flooded? Because I'm going to send you right back to your county emergency manager. But basically, this map is a little bit hard to see, but this is our best guess based on our high water marks and the estimated rainfall of what North Carolina looked like during Hurricane Florence, aka was it a 500-plus year event? And so a lot of North Carolina during Florence was beyond a 500-year event. Even over here at Union County, we're practically in Charlotte, right? The northeast corner of Union County was actually a 100-year event during Florence. Oops. Okay, in the floodplain mapping world, and maybe even the flooding world, this is one of the most important pieces of data that I'm guessing 2 people or less in this room have heard of. Anybody know what Atlas 14 is besides Kalpana? Most important piece of information in the flooding world, anybody? Okay, so basically NOAA, right? They've looked at historic rainfall and they say, what are the chances of Winston-Salem getting 9 inches of rain in a different period of time? So this particular map happens to be the 24 hours. So over the course of 24 hours of Winston-Salem, and I'm not really looking at the colors, I'm a little colorblind, go figure. If they get more than 9 inches of rain, from a rain perspective, that is a 100-year event, right? So it has a 1% chance of, Winston-Salem has a 1% chance of getting 9 inches of rain in 24 hours, okay? I want to give a huge shout out to US and NCDOT. Thank you, NCDOT. Thank you, transportation folks. They have actually cooperatively paid NOAA, and about 4 or 5 states are going together. They are paying NOAA to restudy this. And so why is that really, really important to restudy that? Well, so Atlas 14 for North Carolina hasn't been updated. It doesn't include anything after 2004. Let me say it again. Our Atlas 14 data for North Carolina is 2004 earlier, right? We've had a lot of major rain events, Florence, Matthew, right? We've had a lot of major rain events since then. So super thanks to them for doing this. But that's not exactly why, and yes, we expect things to increase drastically. But that's not why I'm talking about that. What I'm talking about is where we, North Carolina EMGS are heading. So NOAA puts out something called QPF, and that's Quantitative Precipitation Forecast. So that's their guess on how much rain we'll get from a particular rain event, okay? And so I'm not gonna go terribly into the weeds, but we take that NOAA data and we take our water surface elevation data, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to be able to communicate to the EM people of the world, the Roberts of the world, we think this is gonna be a 25 or 50-year event, so forth and so on. And so again, what we do is we go and we download the QPF data, which is showing us how much rainfall there's gonna be in a certain period of time. Right now, we'll just fake that this is a 24-hour period of time, that's how many inches of rain. And so what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to perfect, is I'm trying to tie the 100-year rainfall event to our flood reoccurrence intervals. And I want to be very, very clear here. A 100-year rain event is not equal to a 100-year flood event. There's a whole bunch of math and algorithm and stuff that my engineer knows I'm not smart enough to learn, so he doesn't tell me how it works. He just writes the Python script for me. And so back in August of 21, I think, we had a thing called Tropical Storm Fred, and the engineers had just let Dan play with this tool. So I'm like, cool, I got a new tool, I got to play with it, right? And so the EM has 3 meteorologists, and they said, hey, Dan, this is going to be a pretty significant rain event. Go ahead and run your tools, see what your things say. And we're kind of, trying to help the meteorologists help us not say things that are dumb. But so basically on the left, this is the QPF, this is QPE. So QPF is the forecast, and then QPE is the estimate of what actually fell. And so you can get QPE very shortly after. But for basically the 48-hour period when Tropical Storm Fred dumped rain on the Haywood, Transylvania, Buncombe County area, this is the rainfall equivalent. So you can see these red and even purple. Those are 150 to 100-year rainfall events. And then so over here on the right, this is actually also QPE. And just keep in mind that we're looking at the 24-hour, 48-hour. Tropical Storm Fred, it dropped all his rain in like 4 hours, right? That was the big oops. But our SARD teams that I was mentioned earlier, the damage assessment teams, they went and captured, thanks to the counties, captured all the structures that were either damaged, destroyed, or whatnot. And so you can see here when we were talking to our local EM, our operations folks, I was telling them, it's gonna be Eastern Buncombe County that gets the most rain. It's now the big joke is Dan doesn't know his cardinal directions. If Daniel tells you Eastern Buncombe County, go to the county to the west. Okay, thanks. I'm gonna blame the meteorologist and weather data. But nonetheless, there's a really good correlation here between what we saw from a damage perspective and the more damaged perspective, like the purple and red, dark red dots, to the QPE. So we're not quite ready yet to release it to the world because we're trying to figure out how accurate the rainfall data is. But during Hurricane Ian, we were running the same routines. And so when the majority of the rain from Ian was going to hit North Carolina, this is kind of what it looked like. Again, a 2 to 5 year rain event, not really worth, signing sirens and telling everybody evacuate or freak out or stage. And so 3 days before, we were looking at it again. This is the same rain event, right? This is the prediction 7 days out. 4 days later, it's significantly more accurate, but it's also significantly different, right? So don't expect Dan to be calling your EM folks 7 days out and saying, oh, run like heck, run for the hills, it's gonna be awful, because the rainfall data is not that accurate. So the goodish news is we have learned, or we hypothesized that the 24-hour rainfall is the best rainfall to use. My problem is my operations people, they want to be there 2 days before the 24-hour rainfall is available, right? So we're not quite there yet. But my ultimate goal right now is I want to get much, much better at using the QPF. And Robert, I'm going to be telling our area coordinators, so we EM are broken out into 3 regions, and each region has approximately 5 or 6 area coordinators, and those area coordinators have about 5 or 6 counties that they work with. So if Robert wants to complain about Dan, he has a liaison. He goes to his area coordinator and says, hey, what the heck, EM's not doing whatever, and the area coordinator comes to me and says, hey, what the heck. But my goal is, what I want to get to the point, I want to be able to tell the area coordinator wherever we're looking at here, we think this rainfall event's going to be between a 50 and 100-year flooding event. And so when I say we, I actually mean NCDOT, We host it for them. But NCDOT has an application now. It's called raf.nc.gov. And my big goal here, right, is I want to be able to tell Robert, the county EM person, this is going to be between a 25 or 50-year event, or this is going to be a 100 or whatever, 50-year event. And then I want them, your GIS people, to go in and click on that and say, hey, EM coordinator, it's going to look something like this to this. And so my good friend Jack asked me in the last session, and I'll tell you now that you came, Jack. Thanks for coming. He asked me, so if I'm a county GIS person and my EM coordinator comes to me and says, hey, tell me what roads or buildings are going to look like between a 50 and 100-year event, this GIS data set here, you can either write me, and if you're a local EM person, I can get you access to this, or if your county EM or GIS person writes me and says, hey, Dan, we'd like to get this, I can actually share Henderson County data with you, Jack. And so when whomever, Victoria, comes to you and says, hey, Jack, what does 64 downtown, whatever, look like? You can take this data, and I would take the depth of the water, kind of with a grain of salt. I would literally group 2 to 5 feet, right? Because 2's pretty bad, 5 feet's still pretty bad, right? 5 feet, hell, we can swim in it now, right? But basically, I can share this GIS data set with you, with the caveat is it's modeled, it's guesstimate, and my guesstimate or estimate for rainfall is not going to be that great. And so if somebody comes to you and says, oh, my county EM coordinator or my area coordinator told me it's going to be exactly a 50-year event, that did not come from me. I'm not going to be anywhere near that accurate. But in a nutshell, that's where we, North County EM, are heading. Any questions? Sam?
So with the example around Buncombe and Haywood counties, you had still really heavy flooding in the east and in the west. You had a lot more damage on the west side of Buncombe and the southeast side of Haywood. So is that mainly a result of there just being more structures to be damaged than, say if you have a flood event in eastern Buncombe?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question. So again, this is 48 hours. I think the big surprise there, other than the amount of rain, is I think a pretty big surprise.
Yeah.
I think the big surprise was how quickly it fell. And I'm a geographer, but the Cusco, the river that flooded, right, is a very mountainous area.
Yeah.
So we got 8 inches of rain or more in 4 hours on steep slopes, and it just rushed down the river.
But you didn't have the damage going to on the eastern side of Buncombe County. Is that just also kind of
Again, the QPE here is not reflective of the damage that we saw, correct? And so I can't really tell you why there's no damage here when that's what the QPE is, other than tell you maybe the QPE is not that accurate. There's some level of accuracy problems, right? But it's also a time period problem. If they got 8 inches of rain in 48 hours, and it's a lot flatter there, flat is relative there, right? And they got 9 inches of rain in 4 hours, and they're in a ravine of a river. It's, and there's all sorts of soil saturation that we're not even having to touch. So that's as good as answers I can give you.
well, it kind of connected? Are y'all going to get into modeling, trying to look at, these get updated every so often, but really trying to focus, okay, in the past 1 to 2 years, there's been a lot more development, impervious surface area created likely to create more flashier. Okay.
If you give me 10 people work on nothing but that,
Okay.
until I get that funding. And I'm in to hire somebody really much smarter than myself to do that now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.